LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects by Edward Ruppelt. Chapter 11. The Big Flap. In early June 1952, Project Blue Book was operating according to the operational plan that had been set up in January 1952. It had taken 6 months to put the plan into effect, and to a person who has never been indoctrinated into the ways of the military, this may seem like a long time. But consult your nearest government worker, and you'll find that it was about par for the red tape course. We had learned early in the project that about 60% of the reported UFOs were actually balloons, airplanes, or astronomical bodies viewed under unusual conditions. So our operational plan was set up to quickly weed out this type of report. This would give us more time to concentrate on the unknown cases. To weed out reports in which balloons, airplanes, and astronomical bodies were reported as UFOs, we utilized a flow of data that continually poured into Project Blue Book. We received position reports on all flights of the big skyhook balloons, and by merely picking up the telephone, we could get the details about the flight of any other research balloon or regularly scheduled weather balloon in the United States. The location of aircraft in an area where a UFO had been reported was usually checked by the intelligence officer who made the report, but we double-checked his findings by requesting the location of flights from CAA and military air bases. Astronomical almanacs and journals, star charts, and data that we got from observatories furnished us with clues to UFOs that might be astronomical bodies. All of our investigations in this category of report were double-checked by Project Bear's astronomer. Then we had our newspaper clipping file, which gave us many clues. Hydrographic bulletins and NOTAMs, notices to airmen, published by the government sometimes gave us other clues. Every 6 hours we received a complete set of weather data. A dozen or more other sources of data that might shed some light on a reported UFO were continually being studied. To get all this information on balloons, aircraft, astronomical bodies, and what have you, I had to coordinate Project Blue Book's operational plan with the Air Force's Air Weather Service, Flight Service, Research and Development Command, and Air Defense Command, with the Navy's Office of Naval Research, and the Aerology Branch of the Bureau of Aeronautics, and with the Civil Aeronautics Administration, Bureau of Standards, several astronomical observatories, and our own Project Bear. Our entire operational plan was similar to a Model A Ford I had while I was in high school, but just about the time you would get one part working, another part would break down. When a report came through our screening process and still had the unknown tag on it, it went to the MO file, where we checked its characteristics against other reports. For example, on May 25th, we had a report from Randolph Air Force Base, Texas. It went through the screening process and came out unknown. It wasn't a balloon, airplane, or astronomical body. So then it went to the MO file. It was a flock of ducks reflecting the city lights. We knew that the Texas UFOs were ducks because our MO file showed that we had an identical report from Moorhead, Minnesota, and the UFOs at Moorhead were ducks. Radar reports that came into Blue Book went to the radar specialists of ATIC's electronics branch. Sifting through reams of data in search of the answers to the many reports that were pouring in each week required many hours of overtime work, but when a report came out with the final conclusion, unknown, we were sure that it was unknown. To operate Project Blue Book, I had 4 officers, 2 airmen, and 2 civilians on my project. There were 3 scientists employed full-time on Project Bear, along with several others who worked part-time. In the Pentagon, Major Fournet, who had taken on the Blue Book liaison job as an extra duty, was now spending full time on it. If you add to this the number of intelligence officers all over the world who were making preliminary investigations and interviewing UFO observers, Project Blue Book was a sizable effort. Only the best reports we received could be personally investigated in the field by Project Blue Book personnel. The vast majority of the reports had to be evaluated on the basis of what the intelligence officer who had written the report had been able to uncover, or what data we could get by telephone or by mailing out a questionnaire. Our instructions for what to do before the Blue Book man arrives, which had been printed in many service publications, were beginning to pay off, and the reports were continually getting more detailed. The questionnaire we were using in June 1952 was the one that had recently been developed by Project Bear. Project Bear, along with psychologists from a Midwestern university, had worked on it for 5 months. Many test models had been tried before it reached its final form, the standard questionnaire that Blue Book is using today. It ran 8 pages and had 68 questions, which were booby-trapped in a couple of places to give us a cross-check on the reliability of the reporter as an observer. We received quite a few questionnaires answered in such a way that it was obvious that the observer was drawing heavily on his imagination. From this standard questionnaire, the project worked up 2 more specialized types. One dealt with radar sightings of UFOs, the other with sightings made from airplanes. In Air Force terminology, a flap is a condition or situation or state of being of a group of people characterized by an advanced degree of confusion that has not quite yet reached panic proportions. It can be brought on by any number of things, including the unexpected visit of an inspecting general, a major administrative reorganization, the arrival of a hot piece of intelligence information, or the dramatic entrance of a well-stacked female into an officers' club bar. In early June 1952, the Air Force was unknowingly in the initial stages of a flap, a flying saucer flap, the flying saucer flap of 1952. The situation had never been duplicated before, and it hasn't been duplicated since. All records for the number of UFO reports were not just broken, they were disintegrated. In 1948, 167 UFO reports had come into ATIC. This was considered a big year. In June 1952, we received 149. During the 4 years the Air Force had been in the UFO business, 615 reports had been collected. During the Big Flap, our incoming message log showed 717 reports. To anyone who had anything to do with flying saucers, the summer of 1952 was just one big swirl of UFO reports, hurried trips, midnight telephone calls, reports to the Pentagon, press interviews, and very little sleep. If you can pin down a date that the Big Flap started, it would probably be about June 1st. It was also on June 1st that we received a good report of a UFO that had been picked up on radar. June 1st was a Sunday, but I'd been at the office all day getting ready to go to Los Alamos the next day. About 5:00 p.m. the telephone rang, and the operator told me that I had a long-distance call from California. My caller was the chief of a radar test section for Hughes Aircraft Company in Los Angeles, and he was very excited about a UFO he had to report. That morning, he and his test crew had been checking out a new late model radar to get it ready for some tests they planned to run early Monday morning. To see if their set was functioning properly, they had been tracking jets in the Los Angeles area. About mid-morning, the Hughes test engineer told me, the jet traffic had begun to drop off, and they were about ready to close down their operation when one of the crew picked up a slow-moving target coming across the San Gabriel Mountains north of Los Angeles. He tracked the target for a few minutes and, from the speed and altitude, decided that it was a DC-3. It was at 11,000 feet and traveling about 180 miles an hour toward Santa Monica. The operator was about ready to yell at the other crew members to shut off the set when he noticed something mighty odd. There was a big gap between the last and the rest of the regularly spaced bright spots on the radar scope. The man on the scope called the rest of the crew in because DC-3s just don't triple their speed. They watched the target as it made a turn and started to climb over Los Angeles. They plotted 1, 2, 3, and then 4 points during the target's climb. Then one of the crew grabbed a slide rule. Whatever it was climbing 35,000 feet per minute and traveling about 550 miles an hour in the process. Then, as they watched the scope, the target leveled out for a few seconds, went into a high-speed dive, and again leveled out at 55,000 feet. When they lost the target, it was heading southeast somewhere near Riverside, California. During the sighting, my caller told me that when the UFO was only about 10 miles from the radar site, 2 of the crew had gone outside, but they couldn't see anything. But, he explained, even the high-flying jets that they had been tracking hadn't been leaving vapor trails. The first thing I asked when the Hughes test engineer finished his story was if the radar set had been working properly. He said that as soon as the UFO had left the scope, they had run every possible check on the radar, and it was okay. I was just about to ask my caller if the target might not have been some experimental airplane from Edwards Air Force Base when he second-guessed me. He said that after sitting around looking at each other for about a minute, someone suggested that they call Edwards. They did, and Edwards Flight Operations told them that they had nothing in the area. I asked him about the weather. The target didn't look like a weather target, was the answer, but just to be sure, the test crew had checked. One of his men was an electronics weather specialist whom he had hired because of his knowledge of the idiosyncrasies of radar under certain weather conditions. This man had looked into the weather angle. He had gotten the latest weather data and checked it, but there wasn't the slightest indication of an inversion or any other weather that would cause a false target. Just before I hung up, I asked the man what he thought he and his crew had picked up, and once again I got the same old answer. Yesterday, at this time, any of us would have argued for hours that flying saucers were a bunch of nonsense, but now, regardless of what you'll say about what we saw, it was something damned real. I thanked the man for calling and hung up. We couldn't make any more of an analysis of this report than had already been made. It was another unknown.